And while top administration officials try and convince Congress here at home that a military strike is necessary, President Obama is seeking out support from the international community abroad at the G20 summit. Meanwhile, on the ground in Syria, the battle for control has continued with fervor. Just yesterday, government troops, along with alleged al-Qaeda-linked rebels, fought for control of one Syrian Christian town north of Damascus called Ma'alula. There have been a series of hit-and-run attacks on the village, which holds one of the oldest minority Syrian populations. The residents of Ma'alula speak the ancient language of Aramaic, which scholars believe was the language of Jesus. The attack highlights fears among Syrian Christians and other minorities that an alternative to Assad's regime would not tolerate religious minorities. Earlier this afternoon, I spoke with Archbishop Cyril Afram Karim of the Syrian Orthodox Church. I first asked him to give me a sense of how Ma'alula fits into the demographics of Syria.
Ma'alula is a very ancient town northeast of Damascus, and it is on the list of the heritage centers, the UNESCO list. Ma'alula is made of mainly Christian and some Muslim families who have lived together for many centuries peacefully. Ma'alula is one of the very few towns and cities in Syria where Aramaic is still spoken. Of course, the inhabitants of Ma'alula originally come from the Aramaic people of Syria, which was the dominant race in Syria before Islam. Now, many around Ma'alula have become Arabized through language and through other things, but Ma'alula kept its Aramaic identity. In addition to the Syriac population of the northeast of Syria, in the Jazeera, Hasaka, and Qamishli, Ma'alula and the two more villages around it, Baqa and Jabadin, are the only places where Aramaic in different dialects is still spoken.
And indeed, it's a rarity in itself, but I wanted to move on and ask you how you would describe the experience so far for Syrian Christians, and particularly even priests that have been targeted there throughout this conflict.
Ma'alula is not different than other Christian enclaves and population of Christians in the large cities. They have always felt that what's happening in Syria right now is against their own interest as citizens of Syria, and especially as Christians. As it's well known and documented, Christians under the Assad rule have lived relatively very peaceful conditions. And the government and the Syrian population have been really nice to the Christians, because the Christians, after all, are these inhabitants of Syria, the original inhabitants of Syria. Therefore, keeping the Christian presence in the Middle East, and especially in Syria, is a richness and is enriching the Syrian society. Therefore, they always stood with the country. I cannot say with the government, because they love the country, and that's why they think the current regime is good for Christians. It's a secular regime, and they are very much afraid of what comes after if this regime is toppled.
So let me ask you, how would Christians be affected by U.S. military intervention in Syria?
They will be affected quite badly, and let me just give you some examples. So far, we have lost quite a few priests. We have two archbishops, prominent church leaders, the two Orthodox archbishops of Aleppo, Yohanna Ibrahim and Bulus Yazigi. Since April 22nd, we have no word about their abouts. We don't know where they are. We don't know what happened to them. We are hoping and praying they are still alive and they will come back. But they have been kidnapped by elements who are affiliated with al-Qaeda. So what happens if Syria, God forbid, is ruled by groups affiliated with al-Qaeda? Are we going to have another Afghanistan here? Let's just look at Iraq. Although the government there is not affiliated with any Muslim regime, but the Christians are being driven out of Iraq in their hundreds of thousands.
Speaking of Iraq, I wanted to ask you, Syria does border Iraq, and of course they're seeing a lot of sectarian violence right now. Do you think that what's going on in Iraq is instigating what's going on in Syria?
I don't believe so. I don't believe it's instigating, but I do believe that there are elements in Iraq who are making things much worse for the Syrians. There are, of course, as we hear from the news, there are people coming through Iraq, through Turkey, through Jordan, and through Lebanon. There are elements of extremists who come from all the way from Afghanistan and Uzbekistan and other countries such as Saudi Arabia and Qatar. They're fighting in Syria. They're doing their jihad in Syria. Yes, they are making things more difficult for Christians because these people who come outside of Syria do not understand the Syrian society. They do not know how Syrians live together peacefully side by side for many centuries, Christians and Muslims. They come there blinded by their hatred and by their religious convictions, and they want to implement Sharia law and other extreme norms in Syria. My fear is that one day will come, if God forbid this government is toppled, that we Christians have to make a choice either to leave our country, our homeland, or to be converted, or otherwise be killed there, be martyred.
And I know that your fear is shared by many, many Syrians, particularly Christians in Syria. We'll keep our eyes peeled, and we're hoping for the best. So thank you so much, Archbishop Cyril Afram Karim from the Syrian Church for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.